Making headlines for this week of December the 9th. Women in the lead. Energies of the Divine Feminine guiding the movement forward at Standing Rock. Selling out Ukraine. Sources suggest the U.S. on track to dump Ukraine while people begin revolt against junta government and leadership. We need friends. Putin's State of the Nation address contradicts all mainstream media reports of alleged aggression. And the root of financial evil. Series continues this week on the history of the Exchange Stabilization Fund.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. With all the negativity of the cabal attempting to disrupt the lives of not only the indigenous people, but of the people of the world in general, it is time to focus on another amazing event that has taken place at Standing Rock. If one wants to see an unfolding example of how trade agreements like the TTIP, the TTP, TISA, and others work, one only needs to look at the reports coming out that Energy Transfer Partners, the company behind the oil project, plans to openly disregard the order to stop and reroute the pipeline. Claire Bernish, writing for the Free Thought Project on December the 5th, reports that the company responsible for constructing the Dakota Access Pipeline says the denial of an easement necessary to drill under the Missouri River is of no consequence for its plans to complete the project. According to a statement from Energy Transfer Partners and Sunoco Logistics, which is acquiring ETP in a merger, as we stated all along, ETP and SXL are fully committed to ensuring that this vital project is brought to completion and fully expect to complete construction of the pipeline without any additional rerouting in and around Lake Wahe. Nothing this administration has done today changes that in any way. In short, ETP will complete the Dakota Access Pipeline no matter what the federal government says. Unconfirmed reports claim ETP has opted to pay $50,000 per day in fines for violating the Army Corps decision rather than sidelining the project for months while awaiting conclusions of an environmental impact assessment. A corporation that does not feel threatened by a national government is a corporation that understands that commercial law protects them ahead of the interests of any national government, its people, and the environment. This is another very sneaky way the cabal gets around convincing the public that something is being done when in fact nothing is being done at all. Take also another example. Companies take large barges out into the ocean and dump toxic waste in violation of environmental law. The fines are so low that companies gladly pay the fines while making millions in profit. The public is told companies are being fined, but no one asks where all the fine money goes. If all the other veterans who truly understand their Constitution and who are truly loyal to their other brothers and sisters in uniform, if they followed suit, imagine how the energies could change almost literally overnight if they joined the veterans who have now come to Standing Rock. But something else has taken place that has many observing in amazement and gratitude. Some of the more than 2,000 veterans who answered the call to service in Standing Rock asked the indigenous nation for forgiveness. Tom Cahill, writing for USUncut.com on December the 5th, reported that on Monday afternoon, John Eagle, who is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Standing Rock Sioux, posted several photos to his personal Facebook page of veterans kneeling before indigenous activists, acknowledging the long history of atrocities committed against Native Americans and asking for the forgiveness of the tribes in attendance. To their surprise, Lexi Leonard Crowdog, a Sioux spokesman, forgave the veteran military members present for the past actions of their government, and in turn asked for forgiveness for the Battle of Big Horn, also known as Custer's Last Stand, when Sioux warriors killed approximately 268 U.S. soldiers affiliated with the 7th Cavalry. Jenna Amatuli, writing for Huffington Post on the 5th, referenced an article from Salon magazine which printed the text of the apology to the indigenous nation delivered by West Clark Jr. representing the veterans present. Clark's apology was quoted as follows: "Many of us, me particularly, are from the units that have hurt you over the many years. We came, we fought you, we took your land. We signed treaties that we broke. We stole minerals from your sacred hills. We blasted the faces of our presidents onto your sacred mountain. When we took still more land, and then we took your children, and then we tried to take your language, and we tried to eliminate your language that God gave you and the Creator gave you. We didn't respect you. We polluted your earth, and we've hurt you in so many ways, but we've come to say that we are sorry. We are at your service, and we beg for your forgiveness." Amatuli added that Chief Leonard Crow Dog offered forgiveness and urged for world peace, responding that we do not own the land owns us. Cahill's article noted the response made by the veterans to Crow Dog's call for peace by responding in unison, "World Peace." TYT Politics via YouTube carried this report on how things played out inside at the time.
Hey, it's Jordan with TYT Politics. A really beautiful ceremony just ended in there. There was a request for forgiveness by veterans who kneeled down and actually begged for forgiveness for the genocide, murder, theft of land, all the sins, the original sins of the United States that have continued on for centuries after. Very powerful, people hugging, crying, really a beautiful sight. I'm here with someone who spoke, Doug and Goodfeather, and you were part of that. Tell me about what it was like in that room, because you don't really see stuff like that happen every day.
It was very powerful and emotional, and a part of the process of a veteran, a warrior, is learning how to make peace with himself. That's one of the most important things moving on in life. But to be amongst all these beautiful people, these veterans that came out for the call, when the call went out, was profound, and to see them here and just to be a part of this movement it's very emotional for me.
And let's keep it real for a second. There's very rare time in life Native Americans will see white folk on the ground kneeling, begging for forgiveness. That doesn't happen. It's usually the white folk asking black people, Native Americans, you should apologize to me. You're the scum of the earth. What's it like? Not so much that they're white, but to see, all the sacrifice, all the theft, all the murder that has been perpetrated against your people. To see, in many ways, the people who perpetrated it, not specifically these people in that room, but our ancestors, to kneel down in front of you.
I believe that for people to do that, they truly feel and hear the truth of what has happened in this country and the atrocities that happen in this country. And people to do that, like I said, it takes true courage. That's a true warrior doing that for his ancestors, to make it right here in this life for his generation to come, or he or she's children generation to come, and to hold forth that oath to this great nation. And it's very humbling to see, and very emotional to see. And I believe every one of these people that came here, all these warriors that came here, have true of heart in that manner.
I'm Faith Spotted Eagle from the Ihangtuan band of the Oceti Shakoi.
And you've been a fixture here. I've seen you in my 5 times. You just have a face of a wise woman. And this ceremony today was very powerful. It featured veterans, water protectors, everybody trying to come together, and veterans on behalf of the nation asking Indigenous and Native Americans for forgiveness for all of our original sins. Can you talk to me about what you were feeling during that moment?
I think today was a day of remembrance for my father, who was a World War II veteran. He served in the South Pacific, and through my childhood, I learned what he was carrying with his PTSD. But he did a marvelous job of healing through our traditional culture. And so I got into working with veterans through what my father experienced, and I didn't know that would come by, I suppose, divine design, because suddenly I was serving as a PTSD therapist for VA centers and working with not only Native veterans, but veterans at large and staff members in VA centers. So I feel really, I guess, protective, and I feel honored. I always feel honored every time I do a group with the veterans. But I've been doing this for 15 years, and so it was a marvelous thing for them to intersect with the Oceti Sakowin, who have, all of us in Oceti Sakowin have PTSD.
Yeah, you made a joke where your PTSDs unite.
Yes, our PTSDs are uniting and healing, laughter, pain, dancing, celebrating, going to ceremonies, and with the goal of saving water. And Niniwi Choni is the water of life, so we have a joint purpose here because everybody needs water. And so Oceti means fires, all of the fires. Sakowin means the 7 council fires. So the most recent governance form, which was in the 1800s, was 7 council fires. And under there were sub-councils. But some of the older people say that sometimes we had up to 23 or 28 in the Federation. And they didn't always meet like on scheduled times or even sometimes annually, but when a call was put out to the people that it was a time of crisis and that decisions had to be made, like in this instant climate change and the water, then the Oceti would come to revive. In this situation, the Oceti is a little bit different because when we put the call out to our people, it's like all the nations on Earth responded. Before, it used to be only the 7 council fires. So I think that's an indication that there is a need for these type of gatherings to address these worldwide concerns. And the difference is it's not a capitalistic organization. It's not neo-capitalism. And it's not the industrial complex that is calling the meeting to order. It's the grassroots people that live out on the land.
Occurring on subtle levels, but also becoming more clear for those open to seeing it, is the rise of the divine feminine energy within the world at this time. The patriarchal structure that has been created is starting to implode. It is all part of a larger energetic shift that is taking place within human and planetary consciousness that is, apparently, timed for these moments we are now finding ourselves in. Iceland, for example, currently has over 50% women in those elected to the parliament, even though the question is still vague as to which party will be able to fulfill a coalition deal to assume the role as the governing party. In Standing Rock, however, an article on the IndianInTheMachine.com website on December the 11th shared this perspective. The divine feminine power is taking over many leadership aspects of the world. The unspiritual masculine force has shown he is unable and unwilling to walk in wisdom, power, and love. Protect her as she rises, guide him as he harmonizes, speak to her as she reorganizes, listen to him as he apologizes. This article references another article by Kara Maria Ananda from November the 3rd, where Ananda writes the following. Women are leading the way at Standing Rock to protect the waters of North Dakota and bringing forth a global indigenous spiritual and ecological movement which honors the integral earth and respect of the earth and people. Tara Hauska, an indigenous woman speaking from Standing Rock, speaks to the energies present over the last few months.
My name is Tara Hauska. I'm from Couchiching First Nation, and we're standing on the lovely Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. For the people that are at home reading the news, I think that we've seen North Dakota in particular put out messaging that says folks are violent, that we're aggressive, that we are antagonizing the situation and somehow necessitating this militarized response, when the reality is if you're here and you're seeing, the grassroots media that's coming out, it's people that are gathered together in prayer and unity and coming together for the first time really in history. This is a historic moment. We've seen different councils form. We've seen women's councils. We've seen elders councils, youth councils. There's now several different encampments. There's the Camp of the Sacred Stone. There's the Red Warrior Camp. There's a lot of different folks that are here on the ground, but they're all here for one reason, that's to stop Dakota access.
Many indigenous tribes, and perhaps even most, if not all, recognize and value the leadership of women within their communities. Ananda goes on in her article, adding that Standing Rock is an unprecedented movement of people from global tribes and backgrounds coming together to stand up in prayer for the earth. This is happening because of the strength and commitment of many dedicated women who have started and sustained these efforts. The healing of our waters and earth has a new feminine spiritual leadership that is guiding an ecologically focused partnership model of living. One indigenous man, Nako Bear, was quoted as saying the following about what he was experiencing there. One of the most beautiful things I feel right now is that you see these amazing, empowered women who are stepping up and really reminding us young men, and men in general, that our role is to let the women lead, and yet we're their protectors, and we stand side by side, but the women are supposed to lead with their hearts. Women are bringing their energies to Standing Rock. Ananda notes that many midwives, herbalists, and healers have traveled to Standing Rock to set up health clinics and support the camp. Carolina Reyes was quoted in the article as saying that sovereignty for Indigenous people is only going to come about through the support of women and women's health, in the same way that we defend and protect Mother Earth, in the same way that we need to defend and protect women and the next generations of children being born. Life is being born here in more ways than one. The article has noted that Standing Rock has experienced its first birth. The article shares the following. The first baby was born at Standing Rock in September and has been named Mini Wakoni, meaning water is life in Lakota. Also, the words were seen all over Standing Rock, and that expresses the heart of this movement. She was born naturally without medical assistance, a sign of great blessings upon the camp. New birthing teepees have been constructed there for more expected babies to come. Even though the mainstream media is failing significantly in almost every way possible, the people, the energies, and the collective will inspired by the more compassionate energies of the divine feminine are making their presence felt, and the ripple effects, although perhaps not noticeable on one level, are contributing to the shift unfolding at this time. In other geopolitical news, last week I reported on a rising phenomenon happening across Ukraine and within Russia. Flash mobs are springing up in cities across both countries, with Ukrainian people singing Russian songs and Russian people singing Ukrainian songs, in a desire to inspire and empower people to look beyond what the U.S., the EU, Israel, and others have done to Ukraine. Thankfully, the Ukrainian people are beginning to see the light of day as to what has been done, and are learning that the U.S. no longer cares about what happens to the country. From the moment the Maidan Revolution broke out in 2014, I was keenly aware and saddened by what I was discovering and observing at the time. I knew that it was an intended, created revolution that would only end up benefiting a few people in Ukraine, and the Western partners were hoping that they could fuel more discontent and chaos in the country to create more profit. Lada Ray, in one article from her website on December 4th, notes how the U.S. is preparing to dump Ukraine to save face. She writes that every piece of the puzzle has to fall into place. The U.S. and EU, the neocon, neoliberal, New World Order agenda, has failed. They overshot and overestimated their capability. You can't go point blank against Russia, the great balancer, and expect to get away with it. Napoleon and Hitler tried. This hybrid four-dimensional war isn't like any other war fought before, but it's still a war, and the result will be the same. Every Russian move in Syria and the Middle East, Putin's recent BRICS, Japan, China, India, and Central Asian deals, the Turkish Stream and Nord Stream 2 deals, the Crimean Kerch Bridge, and the railroad to bypass Ukraine, new pro-Russian presidents in Moldova and Bulgaria, and the anti-establishment revolts in the EU. All these have worked towards the shift in Ukraine. The election of Trump and the Democrats suffering a staggering defeat in these U.S. elections seal the deal. The U.S., according to Ray, is looking for a way to save face. She also noted a Ukrainian whistleblower now living in London. Although Ray admits that he is far from innocent, he has participated in some of the crimes, but he also appears to be attempting to make at least some amends. Ray writes that a Ukraine Rada deputy turned whistleblower, Alexander Onishenko, escaped to London. In his pocket, he carried damning evidence against Ukraine President and oligarch Petro Poroshenko. Onishenko apparently made the claim that he was recently recruited by the U.S. to spy and record conversations within Ukraine's corridor of power. Ray goes on to add the following. On Poroshenko's behalf, he delivered cash to buy votes of Rada deputies. This was done routinely as a matter of course. Onishenko says that there were many laws and government appointments which passed Rada only because Poroshenko bought votes. Each deputy was paid amounts commensurate with their weight and popularity. The votes were bought to remove from important state posts anyone who wasn't Poroshenko's men and to install those Poroshenko had in his pocket. This included the posts of Prime Minister, Attorney General, and the Speaker of the Rada. Ray believes that the very fact that Onishenko was recruited as a spy is a sign that the U.S. is getting ready to dump Ukraine. Her sources are telling her that more and more people in Ukraine are turning against Poroshenko. Ray also adds this. Trump and the new people who come with him need solid evidence to save the U.S. face and justify what Trump is preparing to do in 2017. Dump Ukraine as a bad dream. Trump will make a deal with Putin. The release of Ukraine out of USA's clutches will be Trump's peace offering to Russia. USA under Trump is gearing towards dropping the non-performing assets, such as Ukraine, hence dropping the Kiev junta and Poroshenko after supposedly finding out how corrupt he and his regime are. After all, Ukraine failed its purpose. It didn't become a convincing anti-Russia, as George Soros, Victoria Nuland, and the rest intended. Victoria Nuland, you may recall, is the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs at the United States Department of State, and many may recall that she was recorded in a conversation with U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Pyatt back in 2014 as plotting to put in an appropriate puppet government after planning the revolution in Ukraine. In the meantime, however, the people are uniting against the Kiev junta government. The flash mob in music is not only present in Russia and Ukraine, but also in Moldova, and Ray notes how it is spreading to Siberia, Crimea, and other former Soviet republics are expected to join soon. Expect some significant developments to unfold in Ukraine in the coming year. In Russia, President Putin recently delivered his annual State of the Nation address to dignitaries and media, as well as government officials, outlining some of his foreign policy plans for the coming future. RT has a little bit more on this.
Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke before Russian lawmakers today. The Russian president delivered his State of the Nation address, and in it, he said Russia is ready to have a dialogue with international partners, but says Russia will manage its own destiny. RT correspondent Daniel Hawkins reports from Moscow tonight.
Well, the main message in terms of international relations from Mr. Putin was the development of a level playing field on the international stage, the construction of a system where international relations were productive, were based on mutual trust, cooperation, a respect for each other's interests, and fundamentally based on the rule of law. Media is something Mr. Putin touched upon as well. He said a free media was a part of this level playing field, and that the recent accusations leveled against the Russian media by many Western counterparts was simply proof that there was still a long way to go and a lot of work to be done until that level playing field is achieved. Now, it's been a turbulent year in international relations for Russia as well, both with their American and European counterparts with sanctions, as well as with Turkey, for example, that relationship only just being on the mend. Putin said that it was important for Russia at this stage to build bridges, not burn bridges, to form relationships with their partners rather than make enemies.
We don't want confrontation with anybody. We just don't need it. Neither do our partners or the entire international community. Apart from some of our colleagues who see Russia as an enemy, we're not looking for enemies and have never been looking for them. We need friends, but we won't allow our interests to be restrained or neglected.
Talk about the end of a unipolar world has been around for quite some time. Sputnik News, in an article last May, quoted Gilbert Doctorow, the European coordinator of the American Committee for East-West Accord Limited. He was quoted as saying that American behavior towards Russia in the new millennium had been conditioned by a now seriously outdated view of its potential adversary as a failing state lacking in economic might and in social coherence to withstand serious pressure from the outside, enjoying unjustified international rights inherited from its Soviet past, and having as its only military props an aging strategic nuclear force that would be practically unusable if push came to shove, because that would spell national suicide. Unfortunately, some Washington policymakers still believe that the U.S. can treat Russia from a position of strength. On October 2nd, Sputnik reported that the unipolar world has ceased to exist now, that powerful new centers of economic growth are emerging in Asia and Latin America. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov was quoted in the article as saying that old habits die hard. Parting with one's sense of global dominion is not easy, and this process is going to be long and painful, but I'm sure that in the long haul, we'll agree on the need to redistribute our responsibilities from conflict resolution to economics to finance and trade. We are against any quick fixes here. All these problems should be tackled having fully in mind the hard fact that global politics, economics, and finances are no longer directed by a single center, that there are new powerful centers of economic and financial growth now emerging in Asia and Latin America, adding political clout to these new economic powerhouses. The article added that Russia wants to enshrine the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states in an international declaration. This is a fundamental principle of the UN Charter, which, unfortunately, is often violated, Lavrov said. Now, on December 4th, Sputnik reported on Putin's address, writing that President Putin said that the balance in the world is restoring as attempts to create a unipolar world have failed. This was inevitable. Attempts to create a unipolar world have failed. We are already living in different times. Russia has always clung to a point of view that we must respect the interests of others while defending our own interests. This is how we are going to build our relations with our colleagues, Putin said in an interview with Russia's NTV channel. The article added that the president commented on why the West has often turned a deaf ear to Moscow's position on settling military conflicts. For example, during NATO's law-breaking bombardment of Yugoslavia in 1999 and the alliance's operation in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1995. The answer is very simple. Only loud voices are listened to. The situation has been changing, and I think it is not a secret for anyone that many of our partners now prefer to adhere to international law because the global balance is gradually restoring. Back in 2007, Putin had criticized the unipolarity in international affairs created by the U.S. He had stated then that Washington was only focused on provoking a nuclear arms race, expanding NATO while using force unilaterally without any UN mandate, and contributing to making the Middle East more vulnerable, which could lead to extremism. It appears that he was right. Former London Mayor Ken Livingstone, in an interview with RT, had this to say about how the West has been lied to for decades about Russia.
Well, now we've got live from London, veteran British politician and former London Mayor Ken Livingstone's with us. The main message in terms of foreign policy was that Russia is against confrontation, isn't searching for enemies, but won't allow restriction of its interests. Is the West, you think, willing to move more towards those goals and meet with Russia as we head into 2017 or not?
Well, I hope so. In the election of Trump, we're waiting to see what he actually delivers on this. What everyone in the West should know is that America spends 10 times as much on its military territory as Russia does, and China spends 3 times as much. So there's no indication there that Russia is preparing for some sort of armed confrontation. That's nonsense. But a lot of the right-wing media in the West like to demonise whoever the Russian leader's been. Throughout my lifetime, we've been lied about Russia all the time.
Let's talk about some of the other issues mentioned in a wide-ranging speech that went on for about an hour and a half earlier on here in central Moscow. President Putin also spoke about ensuring a level playing field in terms of media freedom. Last month, where you are, British MPs considered backing a think tank's report to actually expose individuals who appear on Russian media, like RT. What are they so worried about, do you think?
Well, I just find this bizarre. I've had right-wing columnists in our press say to me, why do you appear on RT? I said, I appear on the BBC, I appear on Murdoch's Sky programs. I mean, I'm prepared to go on any program as long as I'm free to say what I want. And I've always enjoyed the fact that I often watch RT when I'm at home. It gives a different perspective on the world. We can get the American perspective from traditional American media, but it's good to balance that with the Russian perspective.
And it seems President Putin's name in the headlines is getting more and more of a tried and trusted method to get more clicks online, get more sales. He seems to be blamed for everything from migration to Brexit. Why has Russia been turned into some sort of bogeyman like this? I suppose it helps sales. Just look at the front page of The Spectator, for instance, last month.
But we've had this all my life. I grew up in a world where we were told we were under threat from the Soviet Union. And I can remember the first American presidential election I remember was Kennedy v. Nixon. Kennedy won, saying we've allowed the Russians to overtake us. And as soon as he got into office, he was briefed, and Russia had 4 missiles capable of reaching America. America had 400 capable of reaching Russia. We are lied to all the time, not just about Russia, but about China. Anybody that is, not simply prepared to just roll over and do what's in America's corporate interests.
A link will be provided in the show summary for this story to the full translated speech given by Putin for any choosing to view it, as well as all other links. To the Middle East now. Reports are coming out of Syria this past week that the city of Aleppo has been mostly liberated, and perhaps even fully liberated by the time this newscast gets to air. RT was the first network to have a reporter in the area and shares this report.
You can see how close people living in government territory were to people living in rebel territory. Until last night, this building was under the control of the opposition and was filled with rebel snipers.
This building used to be used before the war to make threats, but rebels for the last 4 years have been using it to make and store weapons. In this room, a row of unused mortars lined up. Out here, 2 of the launchers that would be used to fire those mortars, the army telling us, on the West Aleppo neighborhoods of Suleimaniya and Midan. And behind, iron pipes scattered everywhere that rebel fighters were using to produce these launchers.
There's destruction everywhere. Many of these buildings still have in them unused gas cylinders, unused mortars and rockets. There's launchers for those missiles scattered in the streets. This area now back under the control of pro-government forces, but they still have further to go. Just beyond that intersection, there's still opposition fighters there. Still the buildings are filled with snipers. The danger is not yet over. These streets are lined with these launchers. The army telling us over there there's another weapons making factory, but we're staying on this side of the road because they're worried that some of those buildings over there are booby trapped and they haven't yet been cleared by Syrian army engineers. This is the Ayur area, only retaken just last night by pro-government forces. It's still extremely dangerous. There's snipers on the other sides. These buses were put here by rebel forces as a barricade separating their territory from government-held territories. Injured civilians being evacuated now from the old city. We're leaving now because the elite unit from the Syrian army, the Tiger forces, are arriving to secure this front line and continue the advance into the old city.
Meanwhile, the EU appears to be in panic mode. Richard Spencer of the London Sunday Times has reported on December 3rd that the EU is offering financial support for a Syria still ruled by President Assad in a last-ditch effort to retain Western influence on the outcome of the war, the Times has been told. As the battle for Aleppo reaches an end game, EU officials are said to have accepted that previous Western demands that Assad step down are unrealistic. There is a growing sense that America has been sidelined as a Western negotiating partner. Instead, the EU foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini, put new proposals to opposition leaders at a meeting 2 weeks ago with an offer of aid and investment as a sweetener for all sides. Essentially, what this is becoming is a bribe to allow Western-influenced rebels to retain control of parts of Syria while conceding that Assad can stay in power. A geopolitics article on December the 10th reported that the U.S. State Department officially admitted defeat in Syria as more Russian troops are being sent to join the Syrian army, Hezbollah, Kurdish, and Iranian troops on the grounds of Aleppo and soon Raqqa. This official acknowledgement of defeat, loaded with doublespeak, as if they defeated ISIS, like they've been claiming to be fighting against the whole time, is preceded by the actual surrender of several terrorist factions caught in the cauldron created by the combined pro-Assad forces. This article explores also the use of specially trained Russian forces that are uniquely qualified to infiltrate these Western-sponsored groups, and it is this that may be contributing to the U.S. surrender in the area. Russia has apparently inserted 2 of these unique battalions, which consist mostly of Sunni Muslim operators. These battalions have had a history of successfully defeating Wahhabi insurgency in Chechnya, and they are perhaps best qualified for defeating Daesh and the U.S. command in Syria. The article added that it should be stressed that these 2 battalions are really quite unique units. While formally they are just part of the larger Russian Special Forces community, they have a unique history and a unique reputation. Traditionally, Russia has always relied on elite Muslim shock forces, and most of those have been Chechen. This was true before the 1917 revolution, as it was true after. For example, the so-called Muslim Battalion played a key role in the invasion of Afghanistan, and 2008, the Chechen battalions, West and East, played a key role in the Russian counteroffensive against the Georgian forces. To make a long story short, not only are these battalions known for their amazing courage and skills, their appearance often sends the opposing forces into a panic. Alexandre Mercouri, writing for the Duran on December the 11th, followed up with the fact that the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed the surrender of over 1,200 jihadi fighters, and the Fars news agency was reporting that 4 al-Qaeda commanders were arrested as they tried to flee. The Russian military also confirmed 50,000 civilians have left formerly jihadi-controlled eastern districts of Aleppo by arrangement with the Russian military. Mercouri also noted how Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and U.S. Secretary of State Kerry are still meeting, but it is believed that these meetings are now irrelevant. The article notes that the Russians and the Syrians are not waiting for Kerry. They are waiting for the civilians to leave before they round up whatever jihadis are left. Kerry and the U.S. had a chance as recently as a week ago to save jihadis in Aleppo by agreeing to terms to pull them out. They failed to do so because of divisions within the Obama administration and because of opposition from hardline elements within the jihadis' ranks. It is now too late. Kerry, the U.S., al-Qaeda, and al-Qaeda's regional backers have collectively missed the bus. The fact that 1,200 jihadis surrendered this morning, or at that time, moreover confirms a mass surrender is indeed underway. More details will likely be forthcoming in the coming weeks. In a few quick headlines now, we start out first in New Zealand, where another cabal puppet prime minister has apparently decided to throw in the towel. The New Zealand Herald has reported on December the 5th that John Key is resigning as Prime Minister of New Zealand. Key, his voice shaking with emotion, said he told his cabinet of his decision on that morning of December the 5th. This is the hardest decision I've ever made. I don't know what I'll do next. Key cited family reasons for leaving, saying the job had required great sacrifices from those who are dearest to me. There may be at least one other reason for his resignation, however. An Investment Watch blog article on the same day has reported that it has been revealed that millions of New Zealand taxpayer dollars have been donated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, MFAT, to Hillary Clinton's charity, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, a non-profit organization created from the Clinton Foundation with the stated goal to reduce HIV/AIDS in Africa. An MFAT spokesperson confirmed to the National Business Review that between January 2010 and June of 2016, $7.7 million of taxpayer funds had already been donated and another $6 million was to follow, keeping to a pledge to donate $13.7 million made by the government organization in 2013. Several days before this, on November 28th, the Australian news.com.au website had reported that Australia has finally ceased pouring millions of dollars into accounts linked to Hillary Clinton's charities. The federal government confirmed to news.com that it has not renewed any of its partnerships with the scandal-plagued Clinton Foundation, effectively ending 10 years of taxpayer-funded contributions worth more than $88 million. Why is taxpayer money being given out to charities instead of looking after the needs at home? Australia must have sensed the coming scandal. In South Korea, the parliament there has now voted to impeach President Park Geun-hye. Zero Hedge reported on December 9th that overnight political turmoil migrated to Asia after South Korean lawmakers voted 234 to 56 to impeach President Park over accusations of bribery, abuse of power, and violating her constitutional duties, setting the stage for her to become the country's first elected leader to be expelled from office in disgrace. Numerous articles are also surfacing pointing to Park's connection to a religious cult in the country and that her leadership position has been strongly influenced, if not directly controlled, by Choi Soon-sil, the daughter of the cult's founder. The country has seen massive protests that have been estimated at over 2 million at times, as the people are enraged at the news of this involvement, and yet the people still have protested peacefully without any of the military or police violence that has become the normal in Western-based protests. While the Western U.S. hegemony machine and its partners continue to attempt to blame Islam and its followers as contributing to the violence in the world at this time, there is one event that the mainstream media completely ignored. Matt Agorist, writing for the Signs of the Times news website on November 28th, reported that in one of the largest organized marches in the history of the world, tens of millions of Shia Muslims made an incredibly heartening statement by risking their lives to travel through war-stricken areas to openly defy ISIS. This massive event that would have undoubtedly helped to ease tensions in the West was almost entirely ignored by the corporate media. Registering only as a blip on the London Independent, this most amazing feat was conducted in spite of Daesh, or ISIS, as well as the sacred annual pilgrimage. The article also noted that the brave men, women, and children marched on knowing that a Daesh suicide bomber had just struck near Karbala the week prior. In recent years, this march has taken on a dual purpose. Where it once was a march for Arba'in, it now also encompasses the Shia resistance and protest against the Daesh U.S. ISIS terrorists. Mohammed al-Sharifi, a volunteer at last year's event, was quoted as saying in the article that, unfortunately, some media outlets have gone for stories that, to some extent, can be divisive. If a group of Muslims does something good, it's not mentioned, or the religion is not mentioned. But if someone does something negative, it is on the front page and their religion is mentioned. Mainstream religions throughout history have committed extreme violence upon the world, and yet they try to claim the higher ground in attempting to paint Islam as a threatening religion. The article finishes up with the following. The way to truly defeat Daesh is by rendering their fear and divisive tactics impotent. We need to show Daesh and those being manipulated by their tactics that tolerance and freedom are far more powerful than bigotry and hate, which is why, coincidentally, not a single American mainstream outlet reported on the tens of millions of Muslims marching against Daesh. Across the pond to Canada, and CBN has reporting over the year the story of the Grand River Mohawks. Things are still happening there, although there are a few shifts that perhaps I'll be able to share more about in the near future. Meanwhile, another interesting development has occurred. The Canadian CBC News website reported in an article by Hilary Johnstone on December the 8th that in a move to block a treaty between the Algonquins of Ontario and the federal and provincial governments, a group of Quebec Algonquin have filed an Aboriginal title claim for the lands in downtown Ottawa, the nation's capital, and this includes Parliament Hill and the Supreme Court of Canada. A very interesting and exciting development this is for sure. Chief Jean-Guy Whiteduck of Kitigan-Zibi Anishinabeg in Maniwaki, Quebec, was quoted in the article as saying that we have brought this claim to the court as a last resort. We are tired of being ignored by the Crown, and it is time for the Crown to address our Aboriginal title throughout Ottawa and the surrounding areas. The article notes that the move comes less than 2 months after the Algonquins of Ontario signed an agreement in principle with the federal and Ontario governments that will eventually see roughly 36,000 square kilometers of land, including parts of the Ottawa Valley, signed over to the Indigenous people as part of a modern treaty, but a group of Algonquins in Quebec do not agree with the deal. It is important to remember that there are two types of Indigenous groups in Canada, those who have surrendered their status to the corporate entity of Canada and those who have not. The Grand River Mohawks are one of these groups, and at this time it's unclear whether the Quebec Algonquins are a part of this also, but they do seem to be attempting to assert their lawful status. Sources close to me are suggesting that a possible collaboration between the Mohawks and the Algonquin of Quebec could bring massive headaches to the Government of Canada. It would be a massive win for the Indigenous community to reclaim the land where the current government meets and makes all its rules. This would provide a massive leverage in pushing the government to more sincerely honor its commitments, not only to the Indigenous people of Canada, but possibly also to the entire population in general. More details will follow. I would like to address quickly one news item that has brought a bit of negative comments upon me. I've been accused of failing the children of the world by not reporting on what is now being called Pizzagate. I was given some information over a year ago, but it was given to me in a way that was very incoherent and full of negativity. I advised the individual to provide it to me in a way that would make it easier for me to understand and share. The individual chose not to do this. A negative email a week or so ago has suggested that I should be ashamed of myself. I explained to the individual that he was asked to provide information that he did not deliver. I also pointed out that this story is far, far bigger than I alone am able to handle at CBN. I also pointed out that CBN does not have the support nor the vast global audiences that would have truly exposed the story. CBN, by itself, would have had very little impact, and in the process, I would have been working myself to death and stressing myself out. It was just simply not worth it. Other sources are now taking care of this story. I may choose to report on certain key developments, such as the arrests of individuals. However, I would like everyone to know that I am making a choice, either rightly or wrongly, not to cover all the gory details about what is being exposed at this time. Although I agree that all of this must come to the surface, I believe the vast majority of CBN listeners already know about this, and they do not need to be dragged back down into that level of negativity. If you wish to learn more about Pizzagate or go into all the gory details, I gently invite listeners to visit other news websites. Pedophilia and its connections to satanic cult rituals and practices are currently in the process of being exposed worldwide. And although tragic that events such as these have gone on for so long, it can only help lead to the removal of numerous high-level people connected to numerous different branches of this global cabal, and in the end, this can only be good news for the future. In financial news, we continue this week with the report on the history of the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Eric de Carbonell has put together this series going back to 2012. In this broadcast, we listen now to part 3 of how this secret fund came into being and what its role really is.
The ESF and the CIA go wild fighting the Cold War. To learn about the history of the CIA, I recommend Legacy of Ashes, a book by New York Times reporter Tim Weiner. Weiner has been working on Legacy of Ashes for 20 years. He has read over 50,000 government documents, 2,000 oral histories, and has conducted 300 on-the-record interviews. This is as factual as you can get. Weiner has also won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the intelligence community. Despite the vast resources at its disposal, the CIA has largely been a failure. First, it is no good at espionage. In a typical example, the agency dropped millions of dollars worth of gold bars, arms, two-way radios, and agents into Poland to support a powerful Polish underground movement that didn't exist. 5 years of planning, various agents, and millions of dollars down the drain. On the clandestine side, the human costs were far higher. The CIA has secretly supported fascists, militarists, murderers, death squads, and religious fanatics. The agency's official history could be written in blood, not ink. In Iran, a CIA coup initiated a period of 25 years of repression and torture. In Guatemala, a CIA-organized coup initiated 40 years of military government death squads, torture, disappearances, and mass executions. In Indonesia, it waged a full-scale war against the government, including bombing runs by American pilots. In Laos, the CIA was repeatedly involved in coups and created a clandestine army to overthrow the government. In Ecuador, the CIA ousted President Velasco. In Congo, the CIA installed Mobutu Seko, who ruled with a level of corruption and cruelty that shocked even his CIA handlers. The list goes on. Because the agency operates in secret, most Americans are unaware of the crimes being perpetrated in their name. The deaths from these armed assaults run into the millions. To learn more about this dark history, go to Google Archive News. There has been nothing, no matter how terrible, that the ESF has not been willing to finance. There is unfortunately one area the agency excelled. Through the CIA, the ESF has decades of experience with undermining democracy. In Japan, for example, the CIA entrenched the Liberal Democratic Party in power and turned Japan into a single-party state, which it remains to this day. The other thing the CIA was good at was hiding its own incompetence. Even when the CIA seemed to fail at everything it undertook, the ability to represent failure as success was becoming a CIA tradition. The ESF-CIA set up a worldwide propaganda network. The U.S. engaged in a propaganda war against the Soviet Union, and so it built a worldwide propaganda network, which ranged in importance from Radio Free Europe to a third-string guy in Quito. The network was known to those inside the CIA as Wisner's Wurlitzer, named after Frank Wisner and the Wurlitzer organ. Almost at the push of a button, the Wurlitzer became the means for orchestrating in almost any language anywhere in the world whatever tune the CIA was in the mood to hear. The agency's long-standing relationship with American journalists was first called to public attention in 1973. That led to investigations by 2 congressional committees. Let's look at the final report of one of those committees. What interests us is Part 10 on the domestic impact of CIA operations. The variety of CIA relationships with the U.S. media makes a systematic breakdown almost impossible. The CIA is now using several hundred American academics who write books and other materials for propaganda purposes. In the world of covert propaganda, book publishing activities have a special place. A single book can significantly change the reader's attitude and actions to an extent unmatched by the impact of any other single medium. Well over 1,000 books were produced, subsidized, or sponsored. I have a particular hatred for the book form of propaganda. If anyone thinks the financial crisis was caused by Wall Street greed, please watch my video on the true cause of the crisis. The danger of CIA propaganda contaminating U.S. media occurs in virtually any instance of propaganda use. In the case of books, substantial fallout in the United States may be a necessary part of the propaganda process. An American that reads one of these books will not know that his thoughts and opinions are being shaped by an agency of the United States government. The CIA failed to reveal the names of propaganda books published since 1967. In fact, the CIA wasn't cooperative in anything with regard to its media relationships. Carl Bernstein from the Watergate scandal explained why in his cover story published in 1977. Because from the CIA's point of view this was the highest and most sensitive covert program of all, the CIA went to extraordinary lengths to hide its media relationships. The CIA persuaded the committee to restrict its inquiry and to deliberately misrepresent the actual scope of the activities in its final report. Obscuring the facts was simple. No mention was made of the 400 summaries. Instead, the report noted blandly that some 50 recent contacts with journalists had been studied, thus conveying the impression that the agencies dealing with the press had been limited to those instances. Even while the Senate Intelligence Committee was holding its hearings, the CIA continued to maintain ties with 75 to 90 journalists of every description. As Bernstein discovered after 6 months of research, more than 400 American journalists have secretly carried out assignments for the CIA. Some of the journalists were Pulitzer Prize winners, distinguished reporters. To a degree never widely suspected, the CIA has concentrated its relationships with journalists in the most prominent sectors of the American press corps. In other words, the big names in news. That means people like Brian Williams and Katie Couric. Go to my entry on the Nightly News for an example on how bad the situation is. In response to Bernstein's article, the New York Times wrote a 3-part series on the CIA's propaganda network, and that was the last we ever heard of the issue. Some interesting things were written in this series. At least 18 American reporters have refused CIA offers, some of which were quite lucrative. At least 22 American news organizations have employed American journalists who were working for the CIA. These include some of the most influential news organizations in America. Major outlets like Time, Newsweek, CBC News, and The Times itself were the most extensively used. The Times, under several occasions where the CIA had interfered with the paper's reporting, including in 1954 when the CIA overthrew the government of Mexico, and a Times reporter was getting too close to discovering its role. The New York Times also shows how the CIA suppresses undesired information. The CIA seriously considered a plan to buy up the entire first printing of a book to keep it from the public view. When that didn't work, a propaganda campaign was initiated to encourage reviewers to denigrate the book. A large part of the CIA's effort at domestic censorship was aimed at news accounts of its own operations. Finally, take a look at the CIA report on openness from 1992, which shows that the Wurlitzer is alive and well. The CIA's Public Affairs Office now has relationships with the reporters from every major newswire service, newspaper, newsweekly, and television network in the nation. In many instances, the CIA has persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories. This has helped the agency change some intelligence failure stories into intelligence success stories. The ESF's twisted logic. Consider this. First, the Fed has established currency swaps on the ESF's behalf. Swaps are a type of derivative. Second, the ESF intervenes mainly in the forward market through the New York Fed. Forwards are also derivatives. Now, on the New York Fed's website, it states, the Fed historically has not engaged in forward or other derivative transactions. This lie is produced by the ESF's twisted logic. You see, anything the Fed does on the ESF's behalf doesn't officially happen. This same logic applies to other agencies. For example, the CIA doesn't need to tell Congress about anything funded directly by the ESF. Now take this twisted logic in the context of journalists paid by the CIA. In 1976, CIA announced it would no longer enter into paid relationships with journalists. But what about the ESF? Well, in 1971, the ESF had 300 people on a payroll of 5 million. And in 1976, the ESF had 500 people on a payroll of 10 million. That's quite a big jump, isn't it? This propaganda network has always been financed by the ESF. Taking the CIA out of the equation doesn't change much. The ESF spends the entire U.S. gold reserves. What happens when you give people who believe they have a self-appointed mission of world-shaking importance all control over U.S. gold reserves? Well, they knew the answer to this question back in 1939. Senator Glass, a critic of the ESF, explains what the government would do. You would just go ahead and spend that money, and then borrow more on top of it. To demonstrate what would happen to the dollar, he held up a bundle of German marks. You have to understand that owning gold was only illegal for Americans. Foreigners were not prohibited from asking for, receiving, and owning gold instead of holding on to dollars. So when the ESF delivered suitcases filled with cash to foreign politicians, it was spending America's gold. This was a big deal. Because the supply of gold is limited, its value is steady over long periods of time. On the other hand, the supply of paper currencies, like the dollar, is not limited, so they lose value against gold, or crash completely. By 1956, America's gold hoard was too small to back the dollar. The ESF was spending money as though the sky was the limit. Using the IMF and the World Bank, the ESF went wild financing CIA Cold War activity. This massive spending turned the balance of payments negative. These deficits were badly damaging the dollar. Other countries were building up claims against U.S. gold. The outcome of the ESF's foreign aid was obvious. By 1960, the U.S. gold supply was down to 18 billion against 19 billion in foreign claims. The United States was essentially broke. The gold outflow begins. The gold outflow began in 1958. America's foreign aid and military security programs started the gold trickling outwards. It swelled to almost torrential proportions in 1960. The situation had begun to cause panic. Confidence in the greenback was failing. The dollar, the U.S. economy, and the world monetary system were in danger of collapsing. This was a problem. You see, on the day the dollar crashes, the entire world will focus on the agency that was supposed to protect its value. How do you think Americans, with their retirement savings wiped out, living through the Second Great Depression, would feel about Project Artichoke, a 15-year, multi-billion-dollar search for ways to control the human mind? I think the American people would be quite angry about how the ESF wasted the U.S.'s monetary wealth, and a lot of people would end up in jail for a very long time. So people at the Treasury started defending the dollar like their lives depended on it, because they did.
The links to all 5 parts are in the show summary for those wanting to jump ahead, or for those who may have missed parts 1 and 2 last week. Skipping over the general disclosure and science news this week, I'll jump to the health-related news. As more people awaken to the bigger picture of the frauds, lies, and crimes being committed by governments, corporations, religion, bankers, lawyers, media, education, law enforcement, and more, they will eventually begin to explore the more existential nature of the bigger picture, the role and purpose not only of an individual, but of the human experience in general. Speaking to a group of people attending the World Summit of Integrated Medicine in 2015, Gregg Braden explored the nature of who we are. Braden, according to his website, is internationally renowned as a pioneer in bridging science, spirituality, and the real world. Following a successful career as a computer geologist during the 1970s energy crisis, he worked as a senior liaison with the U.S. Air Force Space Command during the Cold War years of the 1980s. In 1991, he became the first technical operations manager for Cisco Systems. Since 1986, Braden has explored high mountain villages, remote monasteries, and forgotten texts to merge their timeless secrets with the best science of today. In this audio clip, Braden explores 6 of what he believes are the fundamental questions. In the beginning, he outlines the questions, then he begins to explore everything our world has tried to teach us about these 6 questions, and then he proceeds to offer how science is beginning to reveal that what we have been taught is no longer accurate.
If you are watching this presentation today, what I know is that you know this is certainly no ordinary time in the history of our world and the history of our nation, of any nation, in the history of the people of the world. And I want you to know it's not your imagination. We are living an extraordinary time. Modern science, when they ask the question, who are we, they attempt to answer this question by answering what are called the 6 perennial questions of life. I'm sharing them with you on this inverted pyramid. And the first question begins at the foundation, at the very bottom of the pyramid. The first question, what is the origin of life? I'm going to run through these 6 questions quickly. And then on the left side, I'm going to share with you what science has told us in the past. On the right side, I'm going to share with you what the best science of the 21st century is now telling us, and that will lead us into the discovery that helps us to heal our bodies in new and exciting ways and helps us to create that resilience in our lives that we've been talking about. So, who are we? The first question, what is the origin of life? Where does life come from? The second question, what is the origin of human life? And people say, well, isn't that the same as the first? Maybe. Maybe not. There are schools of thought that say that human life has come from someplace other than the origin of all other life. So that's why this is one of the perennial questions. Third question, what is our relationship to our body? Are we separate and powerless when it comes to healing our bodies, or are we somehow deeply connected? Do we have the ability to influence our bodies? And I'm using that word very consciously. I'm not talking about control or manipulation. I'm talking about the ability to influence the healing and the health and the quality of life in our bodies. The next question is, what is our relationship to the world beyond our bodies? And the same statements apply. Are we separate from our world? Are we connected? Do we have the ability to influence, not control and manipulate, but influence what happens in the world around us? The next question is, what is our relationship to the past? Are we at the pinnacle of technological sophistication? It's something that's happened only once. We began primitive, and now we are at this place where we have iPads, iPods, the internet. Are we at this pinnacle of sophistication, or are we living in a cyclic experience of civilizations? What is our relationship to the past? And the last question, what is the fundamental rule of nature? What is the rule that nature is based upon? All right? These are the questions. The last 150 years, we have been taught that the origin of life is random. This is the big controversy now, because the data simply is not supporting this. But this is what we have been taught. The physical data no longer supports this, that all life came from a single organism. The origin of human life, we've been taught that that is random. The DNA does not support that all life came from a single organism. What is our relationship to our bodies? We've been taught that we are separate from our bodies, that we are essentially powerless when it comes to healing our bodies or influencing the healing of our bodies. I remember the very first time I really got this. I was a competitive runner for years when I was living in Denver, Colorado, working as a geologist. And for the first time, I had an injury to my knee. And I remember I went to the doctor, and I was sitting up on a table. He was examining my knee. And just in passing, I believed that he thought the same way that I did. So I asked the doctor, I said, what is it that I can feel that might help my knee to heal a little bit better? How could I feel differently in my body that would affect the healing of my knee so I could run in a race in 10 days? And I remember the doctor looked up at me and he said, son, he said, you can feel whatever you want to feel. It's not going to make a damn bit of difference when it comes to healing your knee. And I immediately thought, ooh, the wrong doctor. But it was obvious that he had a very different way of thinking about us and our relationship to the body. And this is what we've been conditioned to believe. We're separate from our body. Our relationship to the world, we've been taught that we're separate from the world around us, that we must somehow defend ourselves from the elements of nature, the very elements that we are part of, that make up our bodies. Our relationship to the past. We've been taught that civilization is linear. It began primitive about 5,000 years ago, and now it has evolved into the sophistication that we see today, and it's a one-time deal, and that we are at the pinnacle of that sophistication. We have been taught the fundamental rule of nature is competition, that nature is based upon this model of competition and conflict. This is Darwin's idea again. So if you're taking notes and you're writing these down on this side of your paper, on this side of the screen, you call these false assumptions, because every one of these through peer-reviewed science is now acknowledged to be a false assumption, and then you can draw one of these right through it because these ideas are no longer true. They're still being taught in the classrooms. They're still being taught in the textbooks. These are the ideas of separation and conflict that emerged in the late 1800s, early 1900s, And people say, why is that important today? Here's the reason. It's a good question. Because our society is based upon these principles, and our medical and healing models are based upon these principles. The economy that is no longer working for much of the world is based on unsustainable principles that you see here of competition and conflict. Corporations are based on these unsustainable principles, and the model of healing from our bodies by not addressing the cause but trying to fix the symptom is unsustainable. And that's why we see the epidemics that we're seeing today. The good news, new discoveries have overturned all of these ideas. We now know that the origin of life is not random. The physical evidence doesn't support it. It shows us that there's something much, much deeper happening here. In longer programs, we could go into it in more detail. The origin of human life is not random. The DNA is telling us this. The relationship to our body, we are deeply connected to our bodies. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs between our heart and our brain, as we'll see in a moment, trigger the chemistry that is released into the body, and that conversation between the heart and the brain is based on the way we feel, on our emotions. Whereas our relationship to the world, we are deeply connected to the world, and we have the ability to influence, not control or manipulate, but influence the world around us. Our relationship to the past, we now know that civilization, advanced technological civilizations, are cyclic. They're not linear. And the date of the earliest civilizations now, scientific data now is confirming it's over twice as old as what we've been led to believe. Back into the last ice age, about 13,000 years ago, and one of the sites that is a hallmark of this is the site that is called Göbekli Tepe. It is in Syria. It's in Turkey near the Syrian border, a very difficult place right now. Göbekli Tepe. And the last item that plays such a powerful role in our communities and our families. The best science of the 21st century is now telling us the fundamental rule of nature. It's not based on competition and conflict. It's based on cooperation and mutual aid. We're moving from a world of competition and conflict that is no longer sustainable. It is not helping us to solve the problems in our bodies or the world beyond our bodies into a world of cooperation and mutual aid.
The link to the video is in the show summary for this story for those wishing to review it again for better understanding. In this week's final words, I finally have had a chance to connect with a friend I really wanted to visit at this second health spa. He is a tea master, and he offers meditation and Qigong at various locations where I am located at this time. Today was the first opportunity to participate in his tea ceremonies. I guess it is a bit more of a social get-together networking opportunity. Over 15 people attended on this day, and he served everyone samples of about 6 or 7 different types of high mountain oolong tea. This tea is grown at high altitudes in Taiwan and has some pretty amazing health detox properties to it. Perhaps in a future newscast I'll share a bit more about this. He shared with me a story, however, and it seemed to come when I needed it because I was trying to find something to end the newscast with this week. Here's the story that I was given from him. One day, a young man was standing in the middle of the town, proclaiming that he had the most beautiful heart in the valley. A large crowd gathered, and they all admired his heart, for it was perfect. There is not a mark or flaw in it. Yes, they agreed. It truly was the most beautiful heart they had ever seen. The young man was very proud and boasted more loudly about his beautiful heart. Suddenly, an old man appeared at the front of the crowd and said, "Why, your heart is not nearly as beautiful as mine." The crowd and the young man looked at the old man's heart. It was beating strongly, but full of scars. It had places where pieces had been removed and other pieces put in, but they didn't fit quite right, and there were several jagged edges. In fact, in some places, there were deep gouges where whole pieces were missing. The people stared. How can he say his heart is more beautiful, they thought. This young man looked at the old man's heart and saw its state and laughed. "You must be joking," he said. "Compare your heart with mine. Mine is perfect, and yours is a mess of scars and tears." "Yes," said the man, "yours is perfect looking, but I would never trade with you. You see, every scar represents a person to whom I have given my love. I tear out a piece of my heart, and give it to them, and often they give me a piece of their heart which fits into the empty space in my heart. But because the pieces aren't exact, I have some rough edges, which I cherish because they remind me of the love we shared. Sometimes I have given pieces of my heart away, and the other person hasn't returned a piece of his or her heart to me. These are the empty gouges. Giving love is taking a chance. Although these gouges are painful, they stay open, reminding me of the love I have for these people too, and I hope someday they may return and fill the special place I have waiting. So now do you see what true beauty is? The young man stood silently, with tears running down his cheeks. He walked up to the old man, reached into his perfect and beautiful heart, and ripped a piece out. He offered to the old man with trembling hands. The old man received his offering, placed it in his heart, and then took a piece of his old scarred heart and placed it in the wound of the young man's heart. It fit, but not perfectly, as there were some jagged edges. The young man looked at his heart, no longer perfect, but more beautiful than ever, since love from the old man's heart flowed into his. They embraced and walked away, side by side. As I have mentioned over the last few weeks, we are coming to the end of a 9-year cycle in 2016 and stepping into a new 9-year cycle in 2017. Each individual will experience this in a uniquely different and equally beautiful way according to either his or her soul contract or also according to her or his personal choices, based on how one is choosing to view the world at this time. It is a cosmically mind-blowing thought to imagine so many energetic entities merging their energies into one experience at this time. I might take a guess and say that the limited 3D consciousness isn't quite able to grasp the full meaning of this, although many are beginning to tap into and feel energies that are awakening this awareness as they move forward in their service to humanity, the planet, and dare I also say our benevolent galactic family. What I share now is not for everyone who listens to CBN. Some will not resonate with it, and this is perfectly okay. I invite those individuals to set aside this part of the newscast, but at the same time, I also invite you to see how some of these sources make you feel inside. In every message, there are elements of what may feel to be true for some people, but not necessarily for others. Again, this depends upon where the individual is in her or his journey in the current moment of now. This may change next week, next year, and there is also the possibility that it may never change. I may or may not personally accept all information shared by these sources as truth for me. However, I recognize there may be people who need to have some seeds planted so they can begin their own journey and service when they are ready, willing, and able to choose this. Obviously, this story is not meant to be taken literally, but in a metaphorical sense. Many of us have lived lives protecting our hearts and perhaps being afraid to truly open up. Many write to me and express gratitude for what I share with you all, and of course I am so profoundly grateful that you share what little of your valuable time you may have with CBN. I gently remind listeners that I am no more, nor am I any less perfect than any of you. There are gurus and others who seem to put themselves upon a pedestal, marketing their services as though they have the answer for everyone, which I personally feel is impossible. You all need to hear and understand that I am nowhere near being above anyone else. I have lived a life protecting my heart and playing it safe in many cases. I am going through many of the same personal challenges that the vast majority of you are going through. I'm dealing with repressed emotions,
blocked energies, various physical challenges to my body, and I put myself through mental torture at times thinking about past choices or what I may need to do in the future. Like many, I am also struggling to learn how to be more in the present, the current moment of now. Much of my heart has been given to humanity and the planet, and I confess that this is playing it safe to some degree. However, having said this, I am not without my gouges and jagged edges, some of which are deeply a part of my life path experience. I am not a leader in any way. I am only one seeking to help empower people to start asking more questions by looking at different perspectives of the current worldview. And in doing so, it is my creation that I can empower people to explore more, to begin to look at one's own personal truth and share that truth with the world instead of merely accepting anything I share in each week. It is not easy, first, to admit such a thing, and secondly, to accept it, and thirdly, to find the courage to reach out and make an effort to share more. I know this is not easy. I am an example of this. As I said last week, this holiday season, if you choose to put up a tree, use the tree as a symbol of the earth, as the focus for this holiday season, in whichever way is meaningful. It does not have to be religious. It does not have to be commercial, but it can be a celebration of earth. On the branches of that tree, or any tree, perhaps share a small piece of your heart in celebration of the wonderful changes now unfolding upon our planet, even though this may not seem so apparent to many people at this time. Create a wonderful week until our next moment of now.
So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is also on the website. CBN can be followed through its Facebook page, Minds page, YouTube, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that gaining knowledge is the first step to wisdom, and sharing that knowledge is the first step to humanity. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your heart, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.